Welcome back to the Virtual CISO. In the previous episode, we talked about how the traditional perimeter has effectively disappeared and how identity, trust, and AI are starting to redefine modern enterprise security. So today, I want to go deeper into one specific part of that conversation, which is identity. Because honestly, I think most organizations still underestimate how much identity has become the center of modern security risk. For years, identity and access management was treated as a technical or operational function. You have single sign-on, user provisioning, MFA rollout, access requests are all important without a doubt, but they are rarely treated as a strategic business issue. That has changed now because today, if an attacker compromises an identity, in many environments, they don't need malware, they don't need exploit, they don't even need to break through infrastructure controls. They can simply log in. And that's why identity governance is no longer just an IAM conversation. It's becoming a board level risk conversation because access now determines exposure. And most organizations have far more access complexity than they realize. One of the biggest shifts over the last few years has been the sheer explosion of identities inside enterprise environment. And I'm not talking about employees. You've got contractors, vendors, third-party integrations, SaaS applications, automation pipelines, service accounts, API keys, machine identities, AI agents, cloud workloads, and all of these things require access, which means every one of them becomes part of the security boundary. The challenge is that most organizations expanded digitally much faster than their identity governance matured. Cloud adoption accelerated access sprawl. SaaS adoption also accelerated access sprawl. Remote work accelerated it even further. And now AI is adding another layer of complexity entirely. So what you end up with is the environment where nobody fully understands who has access to what. Permissions accumulate over time. Old accounts remain active. Third-party access is poorly reviewed. Privileged access becomes difficult to track, and non-human identities quietly multiply in the background. Honestly, in many organizations, identity environments become operational debt. And the dangerous part is that complexity creates blind spots because attackers don't always look for the hardest part. They look for the least monitored one. And increasingly, that path is identity. Now, once you realize that identity has effectively become the control plane for security, the next question becomes, what happens when governance doesn't keep up? Traditionally, identity problems were often seen as operational inefficiencies. Now they're becoming material business risk. And I think boards are starting to realize that because when you look at many modern breaches, identity is usually somewhere in the attack chain. It could be weak MFA implementation, privileged account abuse, third-party compromise, token theft, session hijacking, overprivileged SaaS integration. And one area that deserves more attention is privileged access. Because privileged access today is everywhere. Cloud administrators, CI/CD systems, infrastructure automation, identity platform themselves, security tooling, production environment. The problem is that many organizations still manage privileged access with the assumptions built for older environments. You have standing access, shared administrative accounts, limited session visibility, weak segmentations. The model simply doesn't scale anymore, and attackers know it. We're also seeing a rise in MFA fatigue attack and social engineering campaigns specifically targeting identity workflows. Not because authentication is weak, but because humans are still part of the trust chain. Security teams are under enormous pressure here. They're expected to strengthen controls, reduce friction, support business agility, manage compliance, and secure increasingly distributed environments. All this while budgets are being scrutinized even heavily than ever. So identity governance becomes a balancing act between security, usability, and operational reality. And that's much harder than most people realize. But identity governance today is not only about employees anymore. That's where the industry still has a major blind spot. I genuinely think that one of the most underestimated risks right now is non-human identity sprawl. Because organizations have spent years improving visibility around human users, while machine identities have quietly exploded in the background. There is service accounts, you have secrets, tokens, workloads, containers, automation tools, AI agents, APIs. Some environments now have vastly more machine identities than human ones, and many of them have excessive permissions. They're poorly monitored. They rarely rotate credentials and are deeply integrated into critical systems, which makes them extremely attractive targets. And this gets even more important in the AI era because AI systems increasingly rely on identity-based access to interact with enterprise environment. They access knowledge bases, they connect to APIs, they read documentation, they trigger workflows, they interact with sensitive data. At some point, AI systems stop being passive tools, they become operational actors. And once that happens, identity governance becomes foundational to AI security itself. Which means organizations need to start thinking differently about access governance, not as a compliance checkbox, but as a core enterprise architecture. I think the organizations that succeed over the next few years will be the ones that simplify identity architecture early, not the ones that continuously layer more disconnected tools on top of existing complexity, because identity chaos eventually becomes operational chaos. So where does this leave security leaders? What should organizations actually prioritize from here? I think there are a few major priorities. First, visibility. You cannot govern identities that you cannot see. Organizations need significantly better visibility into privileged accounts, third-party access, dormant accounts, machine identities, SaaS permissions, and trust relationships across the entire technology environment. Second, reduce implicit trust. Access should become more contextual and continuously validated. This is where zero trust principle actually matter, not as a marketing terminology, but as an operational mindset. Third, simplify identity architecture. Because honestly, a lot of security teams are drowning in vendor sprawl. There are too many disconnected tools, too many dashboards, too many fragmented policies. Complexity itself becomes a security problem. Fourth, governance needs executive visibility. Identity risk is now business risk. If a compromised identity can expose customer data, disrupt operations, or impact trust, that's not an IT issue anymore. And finally, organizations need to prepare for AI-driven identity complexity now, not later. Because once AI systems become deeply embedded operationally, retrofitting governance becomes significantly harder. This is one of the moments where architecture decisions made today are going to shape security resilience for years. I think we're entering a period where identity becomes the foundation of enterprise trust. Not infrastructure, not network, identity. And the organizations that understand that shift early are going to be far more resilient operationally, because modern attackers increasingly operate through legitimate access paths, which means governance, visibility, and trust validation become incredibly important. This isn't just a security conversation anymore. It's becoming a business confidence conversation. Customers care about trust. Partners care about trust. The board cares about trust. Regulators care about trust. And in a world increasingly shaped by AI and distributed systems, trust may become one of the most important competitive advantages an organization can have. This has been the Virtual CISO. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you follow us and share with someone who might find it valuable. And as always, I would love to hear your perspective. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My link is in the description box below, where I'll be sharing additional thoughts and continuing the conversation. Because security isn't about protecting systems, it's about creating confidence. And I'll see you in the next episode. My name is Olivia, and I am your host.